What started as a simple trip to adopt a family dog turned into panic, secrets, and hard truths. That night left me questioning everything I thought I knew about trust and family. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Last weekend, I thought I lost my son. It all started with a dog. My son, Andy, had been begging for one for months. Every day, same request. Dad, can we please get a dog? He was relentless and I was getting close to caving in. But he also had to convince Kelly, my wife. Finally, after a lot of talking, my wife agreed. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Fine, but only if it's small and presentable. We're not getting some big, sloppy mutt." I tried not to laugh. That was just her way. She grew up in a house where everything had its place, where pets were clean, polite little additions to a picture-perfect life. A poodle or a Yorkie? Sure, but a scrappy, muddy dog? Definitely not. Our son, though, he wanted a friend. The shelter was noisy, full of barking and howling. My son's eyes lit up as we walked down the rows of kennels. He bounced from one to the next, barely even looking at the little fluffy dogs we were supposed to be considering. Then he stopped in his tracks. In front of us was a kennel with the scruffiest dog I'd ever seen. She was a mess of tangled fur, with big brown eyes and a tail that looked like it had been broken and never quite healed straight. She didn't bark, just stared back at us, head tilted like she was curious that I squatted down next to Andy. "She's not exactly what your mom wanted, buddy. She needs us," he insisted, looking up at me with that stubborn glint he got from his mother. "Just look at her. She's sad. We could make her happy." "All right," I said, ruffling his hair. "Let's bring her home." The second we walked in, my wife's face dropped. "She's a little scruffier than I pictured," she added, eyes moving from the dog to me. I could tell she was holding back a lot more than that. "Come on, Daisy's great," I said, giving her a grin. "Besides, they're already best friends." She forced a small smile, but didn't look convinced. "Well, I hope she doesn't ruin the carpets." I brushed off her worry, hoping she'd warm up. Andy had practically glued himself to Daisy since we'd walked in, and it didn't take long before he was fully invested in showing her every corner of the house. That evening, as we were getting ready for bed, Daisy wouldn't settle down. She kept pacing around, letting out these soft whines that grew louder every few minutes. "Can't you do something about that?" Kelly finally said, sighing as she pulled back the covers. She looked irritated, glancing at the door like the sound was grating on her nerves. "She's probably just nervous being in a new place," I said, watching Daisy's restless figure in the dim light of the hallway. "Maybe she needs some attention, just until she calms down." My wife hesitated, and I was surprised when she swung her legs over the bed and stood up. "Fine, I'll go give her a treat or something," she muttered, a hint of reluctance in her voice as she left the room. That a few minutes passed before she came back, smoothing her hands on her pajama pants. "Just needed a treat." She climbed into bed, turning over without another word. And sure enough, the whining stopped. I woke up around 3 a.m., a strange quiet filling the house. Something felt off. I got up, padding down the hall to check on our son. His door was open, and as I stepped inside, my heart stopped. His bed was empty. The covers were on the floor, all tangled up, and the window was cracked open just enough to let in the cool night air. A cold panic started creeping in. I rushed down the hall, checking every room, calling his name louder each time. But he was nowhere, just gone. I ran back to the bedroom and shook my wife awake. "He's not in his room," I said, my voice shaking. "The window's open. I don't know where he is. Daisy's also not in the house." She sat up fast, looking at me with wide eyes. But there was something else in her expression, something that looked like guilt. Maybe she escaped, and he went after her? I asked, desperate for an answer that made sense. She bit her lip, hesitating. I don't know. She stammered that my mind raced, trying to piece it together. I picked up my phone, dialing the police, and whispered a silent prayer that he was safe somewhere close by. Just as I was about to head out into the cold night, there was a soft scratching at the door. When I opened it, Daisy sat there, covered in mud, exhausted and panting. I dropped to one knee, running a hand over her tangled fur, confusion and relief battling in my chest. Daisy, I whispered, where on earth did you come from? I knew it was useless talking to a dog, but I was desperate. She just panted, looking up at me with tired eyes. I needed answers. Hours passed, and it felt like every second was an eternity. I called the police, alerted friends, family, everyone I could think of. Just as dawn broke, my phone buzzed with a call from Mrs. Carver, an elderly neighbor who lived a few blocks away. I saw a little boy near the woods behind my house, she said, voice trembling. He looked lost. I didn't want to scare him off by calling out. I thanked her, my heart pounding as I ran to the car. Kelly and Daisy followed, silent and looking tense. The woods were just a short drive away, but it felt like miles. I could barely see straight, dread and hope twisting in my stomach. When we arrived, I jumped out of the car and ran toward the woods, calling his name. I stumbled over branches and roots, my heart thudding in my ears. And then finally, I saw him. He was curled up under a tree, shivering, his face dirty, hair tangled. He looked so small out there, so helpless. I ran over and knelt down beside him, pulling him close. Buddy, I said, my voice breaking. You scared us half to death. He blinked up at me, his face lighting up when he saw Daisy standing behind me. She had followed us from the car, sniffing the ground and wagging her crooked tail. Daisy, he whispered, his little body shaking as he threw his arms around her. I thought you ran away because of me. I picked him up, wrapping my arms around him tightly. Let's go home, all right? He nodded, looking back at Daisy as if she were the only thing keeping him safe. When we got back to the house, I finally allowed myself to breathe. My son was safe. Daisy was with us. But something felt off. My wife was tense, her eyes avoiding mine. She seemed distant, nervous. After we'd settled our son on the couch with a blanket, I turned to her. I swear I locked the door. How on earth did Daisy get out? I asked, my voice low. She looked down, her hands wringing together. For a long time, she didn't answer. Finally, she took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. I let her out. I stared at her, not quite understanding. You let her out? Her eyes filled with tears. I thought maybe if she just disappeared, he'd get over it. She wasn't the dog I wanted. She's scruffy and I didn't think she'd fit here. I could barely believe what I was hearing. I felt anger and hurt boiling inside me. So, you just let her go? You thought he'd just forget about her? I didn't know he'd go after her, she stammered, her voice breaking. I thought he'd just be sad for a day or two, then move on. I didn't want this mess. I just wanted things to be normal. Normal? I repeated, disbelief thick in my voice. You put him in danger because you couldn't handle a little mess? She sank down into a chair, covering her face with her hands. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he'd do something so brave, or that Daisy would stay with him. I didn't think. I shook my head, trying to wrap my mind around it. I looked over at our son, snuggled up with Daisy on the couch, her head resting on his lap. They'd bonded through something none of us had expected, and they had an unbreakable connection now. I don't know how we move past this, I said quietly. But for now, Daisy stays. She's a part of this family, and I think you need to find a way to accept that. She nodded, wiping her eyes, understanding the weight of what had happened. As I watched my son stroke Daisy's fur, a small, hopeful warmth rose in my chest. Family wasn't about having things perfect. Sometimes it was about the imperfect moments, the scruffy dogs, and the quiet forgiveness that held us all together.